Oliver Kensington, a 60-year-old successful property developer, prided himself on the exclusive nature of his neighborhoods. From his office on the top floor of his company's building, he would often stand by the large windows overlooking the city, admiring his accomplishments. A life dedicated to building communities that represented order, elegance, and, as he believed, integrity. He'd worked hard to create residential spaces where people of similar backgrounds could live comfortably, believing that this homogeneity maintained peace and value. One afternoon, flipping through applications for his newest property, he came across a family that made him pause. The Tanners, Eleanor, a kind-hearted social worker in her 40s, her husband, Jacob, a high school teacher, and their 2 teenage daughters, Nina and Mia. On paper, they were ideal tenants, stable income, impeccable credit, glowing references. But one glance at their family photo made Oliver's hand freeze midair. Eleanor and her family were Black, and although Oliver would never have voiced his beliefs openly, he held an internal conviction that mixing backgrounds could disrupt the harmony of his neighborhoods. Without a second thought, he set the application aside, adding it to the rejection pile, feeling justified. He convinced himself that this was in the best interest of everyone involved, especially his current tenants. "This is my community," he muttered to himself. "My rules." Little did Oliver know that his decisions would come under intense scrutiny soon, from a source he never anticipated. His estranged son, Luke, recently returned to town, was now working at a new company, and had no idea about his father's prejudices. Luke had joined an organization that championed social causes, and he quickly became friends with Jacob and Eleanor Tanner through a shared volunteer project. Their genuine kindness and integrity left a deep impression on Luke, challenging many assumptions he'd grown up with in his father's home. When Oliver learned that Luke had befriended the family he had rejected, he felt a confusing mix of anger and shame. Luke, however, had no idea about his father's actions. Over time, as Luke continued sharing stories of the Tanners' warmth and values, Oliver found himself conflicted. His deeply rooted beliefs clashed with the admiration he saw in his son's eyes. This new connection set Oliver on a path of self-reflection, where he would have to confront his own beliefs, make amends, and ultimately discover the richness that diversity and compassion bring to life. But for now, Oliver was a man haunted by the choices he had made, and the truths he was only beginning to confront. This opening introduces the conflict, engages readers by setting up Oliver's inner turmoil, and foreshadows the impact of the Tanners' influence. Each subsequent part will delve deeper into Oliver's transformation, the role of the Tanner family, and the eventual reunion with his son, packed with emotion and lessons on compassion. I'll continue crafting the next parts based on this direction. Oliver Kensington tried to push thoughts of his son and the Tanner family from his mind, but as days went by, Luke's words lingered with him, echoing in quiet moments. Luke had mentioned their volunteer work with the Tanners, how Jacob organized youth outreach programs at the local school, and how Eleanor led support groups for single mothers. These stories unsettled Oliver, though he couldn't fully understand why. Then, one afternoon, an opportunity presented itself that Oliver hadn't anticipated. Luke had invited him to a community dinner organized by his volunteer group. Reluctantly, Oliver agreed, feeling both curiosity and an odd apprehension about who he might meet there. As he entered the bustling community center that evening, Oliver immediately felt out of place. The room was alive with laughter, conversations, and the comforting smell of homemade food. People from all backgrounds mingled, swapping stories and welcoming newcomers with genuine warmth. It wasn't the exclusive, polished atmosphere he was used to, but he felt an undeniable pull to stay and observe. Luke spotted him and made his way over, beaming. "Dad, I'm so glad you came," he said, pulling Oliver into an enthusiastic hug. "There's someone I want you to meet." Before Oliver could reply, Luke led him toward a family sitting at a round table covered in a simple checkered cloth. "Dad, "This is Jacob and Eleanor Tanner," Luke said, smiling. "They're the ones I've been telling you about." Oliver froze, his pulse quickening as he realized he was face to face with the very family whose rental application he had dismissed. Jacob stood up and extended his hand, his face friendly and welcoming. "Mr. Kensington, it's a pleasure to meet you," Jacob said warmly, as if they'd known each other for years. Caught off guard, Oliver hesitated before shaking Jacob's hand. His mind raced, a mix of guilt and discomfort overwhelming him. Standing here before the Tanners, he realized they had no idea he had rejected them. For a moment, he considered leaving, but something kept him rooted to the spot. It's nice to meet you," he replied, his voice barely concealing his discomfort. Eleanor, sensing the tension, stepped forward with a kind smile. "Luke has told us so much about you, Mr. Kensington. He mentioned that you're a community builder." Her genuine warmth softened his defenses, but he struggled to return the smile. Dinner began, and Oliver took a seat beside Luke, unable to focus on the food or conversation. He was torn between guilt and curiosity, watching the Tanners interact with everyone around them. Jacob was quick to offer help wherever it was needed, and Eleanor had a way of making each person she spoke to feel seen and valued. Throughout the meal, Luke animatedly shared stories of their volunteer work, from organizing food drives to helping families in need. As Oliver listened, a slow realization began to take hold. This wasn't the family he had pictured in his mind when he made his decision to reject their application. These were good, hard-working people who were everything he claimed he wanted in a tenant: kind, responsible, dedicated to community. A surge of shame washed over him as he thought of how quickly he had judged them based on their appearance alone. He realized that he had never given them a fair chance, and the weight of this realization settled heavily on his heart. By the end of the evening, as people started to disperse, Oliver stood to leave, but Luke caught his arm. "Dad, what did you think of the Tanners?" Luke asked, a hopeful glint in his eyes. Oliver hesitated, struggling to find words. They're good people, Luke. Very good people." Luke smiled, satisfied with his father's answer. "I thought so too. They've been like a second family to me." As Oliver left the community center that night, he was overcome with a sense of conflict and regret. His son had found connection and purpose among people he had once looked down upon. But perhaps, he thought, it wasn't too late for him to change. In the days following his encounter with the Tanners, Oliver Kensington found himself increasingly restless. His mind constantly replayed scenes from the community dinner: Eleanor's warm smile, Jacob's generous nature, and Luke's obvious admiration for this family. Every detail deepened his guilt. For years, he'd told himself that his standards and policies kept his properties valuable and desirable. But now, he was starting to question whether his ideas of desirability had been rooted in something less noble. Haunted by his actions, Oliver decided it was time to take a hard look at himself. Sitting alone in his grand but empty home, he rifled through the rental applications on his desk, pulling out the one he'd rejected. The Tanners had checked every box: income, credit, references. On paper, they were ideal tenants, but he had dismissed them without a second thought, based solely on an old, silent prejudice he'd carried for years. The realization hit him like a cold wave. His rejection of the Tanners wasn't about maintaining standards at all. It was about fear, a fear that he hadn't even recognized until now. Determined to make things right, Oliver picked up the phone and called Luke. "Son, would you like to join me for lunch tomorrow?" he asked, his voice wavering slightly. He knew he needed to open up, not only to Luke but to himself. At lunch the next day, Oliver chose a quiet corner table at a cafe in town. He looked nervous, and Luke noticed immediately, raising an eyebrow as they sat down. "What's on your mind, Dad?" Luke asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Oliver took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "Luke, I need to tell you something." he began, his voice tight with emotion. About the Tanners. I actually rejected their rental application for one of my properties. I didn't even give them a fair chance. And I'm ashamed to admit that the reason was, well, it was because of their background. Luke's face shifted from surprise to disappointment, and for a moment, he simply stared at his father, processing what he'd just heard. Oliver's heart sank as he watched the hurt flicker across his son's expression. You mean to tell me that you turned them away without even considering their qualifications? Luke asked, his voice steady but laced with sadness. Oliver looked down, unable to meet his son's gaze. I did. And it was wrong, Luke. I see that now. Meeting the Tanners. It made me realize that I'd built my own walls, and I've spent years hiding behind them, shutting people out for reasons I can't even justify anymore. Luke let out a long sigh, leaning back in his chair, his disappointment palpable. Dad, they're some of the best people I know. You don't see kindness like that every day, and you've been missing out on knowing people like them because of… What? Some unfounded prejudice? Oliver felt the weight of Luke's words, each one striking at the core of his carefully built beliefs. He knew he had hurt his son, and he could see that this was more than just about the Tanners. It was about everything Oliver had tried to instill in Luke. Ideas about exclusivity, about maintaining standards. Luke's life choices had already shown that he rejected those ideals, and now, Oliver was starting to see why. Luke, he said quietly, reaching across the table to touch his son's hand. I'm sorry. I know saying that doesn't erase what I did, but I want you to know that I'm willing to change. Meeting the Tanners made me see things differently. I don't want to be the man who shuts people out anymore. Luke regarded his father, his expression softening slightly. Then, maybe it's not too late, Dad. People can change, but it takes more than words. It takes action. Oliver nodded, understanding the challenge in his son's words. He had to do more than apologize. He had to make things right. I'll reach out to the Tanners, he said, his voice steadier now. And if they'll let me, I'd like to offer them the rental property I turned them down for. It's the least I can do to begin making amends. Luke smiled, his face finally softening with approval. That's a start, Dad. They might not accept it, but they'll appreciate that you're trying to make things right. With a renewed sense of purpose, Oliver left the cafe, his mind clear for the first time in days. He was ready to confront the consequences of his past choices and to begin rebuilding not only his relationship with Luke, but also the principles that guided his life. That evening, Oliver drafted a heartfelt letter to the Tanners, inviting them to his office to discuss the rental opportunity once more. He knew he couldn't undo his actions, but he hoped that this step would open the door to a new beginning, for him and, perhaps, for the community he had been so determined to control. The journey wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Oliver felt ready to face it. The next morning, Oliver sat at his office desk, anxiously tapping his fingers as he awaited the Tanners' arrival. He had been replaying his apology in his mind all night, trying to find the right words to convey his regret. Despite his success in business, Oliver had rarely found himself in a position where he had to ask for forgiveness. The weight of his own actions hung heavily on him, and he realized that his journey to make amends had only just begun. The Tanners arrived promptly, and Oliver felt a pang of anxiety as he saw them enter his office. Jacob held Eleanor's hand as they stepped inside, both of them visibly composed but slightly apprehensive. Their daughters, Nina and Mia, stood beside them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. Oliver rose from his chair, extending his hand with a tentative smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Tanner," he began, clearing his throat. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Jacob and Eleanor exchanged a glance before nodding politely and sitting down. Oliver's mind raced as he looked at them, realizing that no amount of rehearsing could truly prepare him for this moment. The Tanners were here, ready to listen, but he could see that they were guarded, unsure of what to expect from this unexpected meeting. Taking a deep breath, Oliver decided to speak from his heart. "Mr. and Mrs. Tanner," he began, his voice steady but tinged with humility. "I owe you both an apology. A deep, sincere apology. I reviewed your application some time ago, and I made a decision based on assumptions, prejudices, and frankly beliefs that I see now were wrong. I didn't give you a fair chance, and that's something I deeply regret." Eleanor's eyes softened, though she kept a reserved expression, waiting to hear more. Jacob, who had been watching Oliver intently, nodded slightly, acknowledging the words, but not yet letting his guard down. "I understand if you find it difficult to forgive me," Oliver continued, "but I want you to know that I'm trying to change. Meeting you through my son Luke has made me see things differently. Your kindness, your commitment to the community, and the values you've instilled in your family, they've shown me a different side of what it means to be a part of this neighborhood. It's a side I had ignored for too long." Jacob leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Kensington, we've faced prejudice before, so we know what it feels like. But we never expected it from someone we hadn't even met. It hurt to be rejected without reason, especially when we were hoping to build a better life for our family here." Oliver nodded, feeling the weight of Jacob's words. "I can't imagine how that must have felt, and I know words alone won't make up for it. But if you're open to it, I'd like to offer you the rental property again, on the terms you initially applied for, without any extra conditions. I would be honored if you considered it." Eleanor glanced at Jacob, her expression softening. "Mr. Kensington, it's not about the property itself," she said gently. "It's about trust, about knowing that the place we call home is one where our family will be welcomed, not judged. This isn't just about the application. It's about creating a community where everyone feels they belong." Her words struck a deep chord in Oliver. For the first time, he understood that his policies had created invisible walls, separating people rather than bringing them together. He had been so focused on maintaining exclusivity that he had forgotten the purpose of community, to create a place where people could come together, support one another, and thrive. Jacob took a deep breath and looked Oliver in the eye. "Mr. Kensington, we're willing to forgive, but only if we can move forward with understanding and respect. We're not looking for special treatment. We just want a fair chance." A wave of relief washed over Oliver, and he nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Thank you both for giving me this chance. I promise to do better, not only for you, but for everyone in this community. I want to make sure this neighborhood is a place where families like yours feel valued, respected, and welcomed." Eleanor reached out, placing her hand gently on Oliver's. "We accept your apology, Mr. Kensington. And if you're truly committed to this change, we're willing to be part of this community with you." In that moment, Oliver felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of genuine connection and hope. For so long, he had isolated himself behind layers of wealth, status, and control. But this simple act of forgiveness from the Tanners broke through those barriers. It was as if a new chapter was opening, not only for his community, but for his own life. As they stood to leave, Oliver noticed that Nina and Mia were quietly watching him. He smiled at them, and they returned the gesture, their expressions a mix of acceptance and cautious optimism. He realized that earning the trust of their entire family would take time, but he was ready to put in the effort. After they left, Oliver sat alone in his office, reflecting on the encounter. It wasn't just about a property or a policy change. It was about building something more meaningful. He felt a renewed purpose, a desire to use his influence to create a community that valued kindness, diversity, and respect. This was only the beginning of Oliver's transformation, and he knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for now, he felt a sense of peace, knowing he had taken the first step toward becoming the man he truly wanted to be. Following his apology to the Tanners, Oliver felt a renewed sense of purpose, one he hadn't experienced in years. His conversation with Jacob and Eleanor lingered in his mind, reshaping his views on community, acceptance, and genuine connection. He was determined to prove to them, and to himself, that he could be an advocate for change in the neighborhood he once guarded so carefully. In the days that followed, Oliver reached out to his tenants, inviting them to a community meeting. For the first time, he wanted to hear directly from the people who lived in his properties. He realized that creating an inclusive community meant listening to everyone's experiences, aspirations, and concerns. It was a concept that was both foreign and humbling to him, yet he felt it was necessary. When the evening of the meeting arrived, Oliver was surprised by the turnout. Families of all backgrounds, ages, and walks of life filled the community center, each person bringing a unique story and perspective. Some looked curious, others wary, but everyone had come with an open mind. Oliver stood at the front, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for coming. I invited you here because I realized that I haven't been the kind of landlord and neighbor that I should be. I focused on exclusivity and appearance, rather than on building a place where we all feel welcome." His words hung in the air, met with a silence that felt both heavy and expectant. Oliver glanced across the room, seeing families he recognized but had never truly known. It was the first time he had ever shared his own vulnerability in a public setting, and it was more difficult than he had anticipated. Then, to his surprise, someone spoke up. "Mr. Kensington," a woman near the front said, her voice gentle but firm. "It takes courage to admit when we've been wrong. I've lived here for over 10 years, and while I've always appreciated the quality of your properties, I've often felt like we were just tenants, not a real part of this community." Her words struck Oliver deeply, but instead of feeling defensive, he felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. This was exactly why he had organized the meeting, to uncover the truth of people's experiences and to find a way to improve. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm here to listen and to learn, and I hope you'll share what it would take to make this community one where everyone feels valued." Slowly, other voices joined in, each person adding their perspective to the conversation. Some spoke about wanting more community events, spaces where families could connect, and programs for children and teens. Others shared concerns about feeling unseen or overlooked, recounting moments when they felt as if their backgrounds or lifestyles didn't align with the neighborhood's standards. Each story chipped away at the old vision Oliver had held, revealing a new one that was far richer and more inclusive. As the discussion continued, Oliver noticed Luke standing quietly at the back of the room, observing with a proud, approving smile. The sight of his son filled him with a quiet strength, reminding him why this transformation was so important. Luke had been the first to challenge his beliefs, to show him that kindness and community extended far beyond the limits he had set for himself. Near the end of the meeting, Eleanor and Jacob Tanner stood up, drawing everyone's attention. Eleanor looked around the room, a warm smile lighting up her face. "My family and I moved here because we believed in the possibility of community, and I'm happy to see that so many of you feel the same way. We can make this neighborhood a place where everyone feels they belong. But it will take effort, and more importantly, a commitment to each other." Jacob nodded in agreement. True community isn't just about living next door to each other. It's about supporting one another, learning from one another, and finding strength in our differences. Their words sparked a ripple of agreement throughout the room, and Oliver felt an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. This was the community he had always dreamed of building, but it had taken a transformation of his own heart to see it clearly. As the meeting wrapped up, Oliver approached the Tanners, extending a heartfelt thanks for their patience and grace. "You've shown me more than I ever could have expected," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I want to continue learning from you, if you're willing." Jacob placed a reassuring hand on Oliver's shoulder. We're all learning, Mr. Kensington. Every day is a chance to be better, and we're glad to be a part of this journey with you. The next morning, Oliver began putting plans into action. He established a fund for community activities, allocating a portion of his own earnings to support events, classes, and projects aimed at bringing neighbors closer together. He reached out to local leaders, offering his resources and connections to create mentorship programs for the youth in the neighborhood. He even organized a Meet Your Neighbor Day, where each family could introduce themselves and share stories, creating bonds that went beyond superficial greetings. The neighborhood began to transform, and Oliver felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every day he engaged with the families around him, learning their names, their dreams, their struggles. He found a joy in these connections that surpassed the pride he had once felt for his exclusive properties. The Tanners continued to be active participants, helping organize events and guiding him whenever he needed advice. As the weeks passed, the once closed community blossomed into a place filled with laughter, support, and genuine camaraderie. Oliver was no longer seen as a distant figure, but as an integral part of the neighborhood. He had gained the respect and friendship of his tenants, not by wielding authority, but by embracing humility and openness. One evening, during a neighborhood potluck organized by the Tanners, Oliver watched as families of all backgrounds shared food, stories, and laughter. He spotted Nina and Mia helping younger children with crafts, their faces alight with joy. Jacob and Eleanor moved through the crowd, greeting friends and making newcomers feel at home. In that moment, Oliver felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a satisfaction that went far beyond financial success or personal achievement. This was what he had been missing all along: the richness of human connection, the beauty of shared purpose, and the warmth of a community built on acceptance and kindness. As he stood there, taking in the scene, he realized that his life had changed irrevocably. The journey had been difficult, full of humbling lessons and painful truths, but he wouldn't have traded it for anything. He had found a new purpose, one that gave meaning to every day and filled his heart with gratitude. And for the first time, Oliver Kensington felt at home. Months passed, and Oliver Kensington's once exclusive neighborhood had transformed into a vibrant, welcoming community where differences were celebrated and people looked out for one another. Oliver had become an integral part of it, attending every event and personally connecting with as many residents as he could. He had made friends across all backgrounds, each relationship teaching him more about life, humility, and compassion. One evening, as the neighborhood gathered for an annual autumn festival, now a beloved tradition in the community, Oliver took a moment to reflect on how far they had all come. The Tanners stood nearby, their daughters playing alongside children of every background. He smiled, knowing that this beautiful scene of unity was something he never could have imagined a year before. Eleanor and Jacob noticed Oliver and approached him with warm smiles. "Thank you, Oliver," Eleanor said softly. "You've given this community so much more than you might realize. You've given everyone a place to belong." Oliver felt a lump in his throat. "No," he replied, shaking his head gently. "It's you and everyone here who showed me what true community means. You taught me that real success is measured not in wealth or status, but in the impact we have on each other's lives." As the festival continued, Oliver took to the small stage to address the crowd. With a sincere smile, he raised his voice over the lively sounds of laughter and music. "Thank you all for being here, and for letting me be part of this journey with you," he began, his voice filled with gratitude. "This community has taught me that together, we are stronger, kinder, and more resilient. We're building a place where everyone is valued, where we lift each other up, and where we can all feel at home." The crowd erupted in applause, and Oliver's heart swelled with pride and humility. He realized that his true legacy wasn't the buildings he'd constructed, but the lives he had touched by embracing acceptance and unity. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to reflect on your own community. Consider the power of kindness, compassion, and inclusion, and think about how you can contribute to building a place where everyone feels they belong. Join us on this journey by subscribing to our channel, sharing stories of unity, and spreading messages of compassion. Together, let's create a world where every neighborhood becomes a true community, where walls are replaced by bridges, and where everyone has a place to call home. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to stay inspired and be part of our community. Thank you for watching, and remember, change begins with each of us.